If you're currently losing your hair, I don't have to tell you that it isn't easy. And even though most guys will lose their hair at some point in their lives, why is it so difficult for some of us to come to grips with the fact that we are going to one day be bald? I've given this a lot of thought over the years, and while yes, some superficial reasons like perceived attractiveness can certainly play a factor, I think the main reason is that it feels like a loss of identity. To illustrate this better, let's imagine a young man named Joe. Joe has played guitar since he was a kid and got pretty good at it at an early age. His friends and family loved to hear him play, and he would often play for talent shows and other get-togethers. Most people in Joe's life began to know him as a guitar player and saw him as someone who had real promise for a career in music. Then, tragically, Joe suffered an injury to his hand that made it impossible for him to play guitar. Even after the injury fully healed, he found it very difficult to grip the neck of the guitar for an extended amount of time. After a little while, Joe comes to the realization that he will never be able to play guitar again. At first, he's at a loss because playing the guitar has been such a huge part of his identity for almost his entire life. Now, his ability to play guitar has nothing to do with his personality, his morals, his work ethic, his relationships, but it was still a part of what made Joe Joe. Having to accept that he could no longer play guitar meant accepting a loss of part of his identity. Joe began to worry what his friends and family might think of him now that he could no longer play. He worried that they would judge him and think lesser of him. And now Joe would have to figure out who he was without the guitar. And just like Joe, if you're losing your hair, you may have a similar quote-unquote identity crisis. So let's now take a look at Michael. Michael always had super thick hair that he absolutely loved. Every time he would go to get his hair cut, the person cutting his hair would tell him how thick and lustrous his hair was, and he liked trying out different styles. He could pull off almost anything, including a mullet. One day, Michael's getting ready in the morning, and he pulls his hair back with his hands, and his heart skips a beat because he notices a little bit of receding around the temples. The next time he gets his haircut, the barber makes a small comment saying how the hair around the crown of his head is thinning out a little bit. Now, while the barber didn't mean to do this by making this comment, it throws Michael into a panic. And over the next year, Michael starts to notice that his hair is thinning more and more, and his hair around the temples is receding further and further back. Just like with Joe, Michael now realizes that a part of his identity might be going away, and he will now have to figure out how to cope with that. And also like Joe, he is worried what his friends and family might say about him. He's worried they're going to mock him or make fun of him. Part of why this shift in identity can be so hard is simply because it is change. Change can be very scary because it brings about the unknown. But it is also hard because we as humans are very social creatures, and we are naturally programmed to want to be accepted by a community. Once we have found our place in that community, we become very comfortable there, and we know that we have been accepted for who we are. When you feel like your identity is changing or that you're losing part of it, your natural social instincts kick in, and we start to fear rejection from that community that we've become a part of. Think about it. If you were stranded on a desert island by yourself, would you be concerned about losing your hair? Same thing if you were the last person left on Earth. Would you care at all that you were going bald? Of course not. We only care about it because of how we think we will be accepted in our community and in society as a whole. So how do we get over this fear? Well, let's go back to Joe. Joe took the loss of his ability to play the guitar pretty hard for a while. He became depressed and began speaking to his family and friends less and less. And when he did speak to them, he was moody and negative. Some people took this as a sign that Joe didn't want to speak to them. And in turn, they began reaching out to Joe less and less. And Joe, of course, assumed that these people were reaching out to him less because he could no longer play guitar, creating his own self-fulfilling prophecy. This pattern persisted for a while until finally one of Joe's friends sat him down and asked him, "Hey, what's going on? This isn't you. Why are you pushing everybody away?" After some time, Joe finally broke down and told his friend everything. He told him about his insecurities about no longer being able to play the guitar. He felt that his value to his friends and family was very much entwined with his ability to play guitar. His friend was shocked initially and looked at him and said, "How could you possibly think that your ability to play the guitar has anything to do with our friendship?" For Joe, just hearing those words made him realize that his fears had been completely irrational. And while it still took him a little bit of time to fully recover, Joe began returning to his old self. One day, while at a friend's house, his friend shows him a brand new keyboard that he had just bought, and he asks Joe if he wants to play it. Joe discovers he enjoys playing the keyboard just as much as he did playing the guitar, and he gets a keyboard for himself shortly after. Joe realizes that while he can no longer play guitar, there are still so many more things in life that he has the ability to do, and he decides to focus on those. Michael's story is very similar. As his hair loss progresses, he becomes more and more depressed. He spends less and less time with his friends and family, worried about what they might think of him. Some take this as a sign that he doesn't want to speak to them, and in turn, they reach out to him less and less. Michael begins spiraling for a while until a friend sits him down and says, "Hey, this isn't you. Why are you pushing everybody away?" After some time, Michael finally breaks down and tells his friend everything. He tells him about all the insecurities he's been feeling about his hair loss. His friend was shocked initially and said to him, "Michael, how could you possibly think that your hair has anything to do with our friendship?" Just hearing those words helps Michael realize that his fears have also been irrational. And while it also takes him some time, Michael finally starts returning to his old self. One day, he buys himself a pair of clippers and shaves his head. And while his friends and family are initially a little bit shocked to see his new appearance, that only lasts a short time. Michael soon discovers that he loves having a shaved head because it saves him a ton of time in the morning that he used to waste getting his hair ready. And he begins using that time to work out instead. Regardless of what your relationship was like with your hair, maybe you loved your hair and you enjoyed styling it, or maybe you had a very neutral relationship with your hair. Either way, it was still a part of your identity. And realizing you might not have that anymore can be scary. But once we recognize that our fears of social acceptance are completely irrational, it makes regaining your identity so much easier. Now, this may not be an overnight process, but recognizing why we are fearful of things is the first step to getting over that fear. The next step is to address that fear head on. You can do this by talking about how you're feeling with others, maybe a friend, a family member, therapist. There are online support communities as well. Another way of moving through this fear is to reframe the way you think about it. A change in your identity could be a chance for a fresh start in your life. When I was in high school, I was a shy, introverted kid. And when I was moving to college, I took that as an opportunity to reframe myself and create a bit of a new identity for myself in a way that I wanted. And same thing when I shaved my head. The day I shaved my head, I left a lot of insecurities behind as well. There's something about a dramatic change in your life that allows you to reframe things in a way that you might want to. Now, of course, you're still going to be you, but maybe this new version of you does things differently. This new version of you maybe improves on some of the things that you've always wanted to improve on. For example, maybe this new version of you works out at the gym every day, or isn't afraid to introduce yourself to new people, or puts in that extra effort at school or at work. Lots of things are going to happen to us in our lives, some good and some bad, but it's how we respond to those things that allows us to grow as individuals. I want to thank you for watching this video to the end. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.